The video you are about to watch is from an old woodworking magazine that I published during the years of 2003 to approximately 2006. This was a very unique magazine. It was purely video content and it was distributed on DVDs. The magazine ran for approximately 3.5 years, and then due to financial concerns, we simply had to terminate the magazine. We moved on to other things over the last roughly 15 years. However, there has been a request to resurrect this content, so I've gone through the trouble to get the equipment, the products, everything I needed in order to bring this content back to life to share with everyone. Here on this YouTube channel, we'll be putting up approximately 100 to 120 of the original stories that appeared in that magazine. The magazine was called Woodworking at Home Magazine, and it was truly one of a kind in the world. I really hope you enjoy these videos, and please tell your friends about them. One of the tools in your workshop that will get plenty of use is your miter saw. Be it a compound miter saw, a regular miter box, 10-inch, 12-inch, or a slider. All around these tools get plenty of use in the woodworking shop. Now, having a nice functional cabinet or base for it is very important. You want it at an appropriate height, something that's comfortable. You want some form of support for longer boards. Now, in this older unit that we had designed about 10 years ago, we used a hinged brace for it. And with heavy loads on it, every once in a while, the shelf would collapse. Another problem with this older cart was that the shelves only folded down. So if we piled stuff underneath the cart, after getting it in a certain position, we had a tough time moving everything out of the way. Another problem was storage on it. When we designed it, we just put a shelf, 2 shelves in it, a bottom and a middle shelf, and then piled stuff in it. Not very organized, and it sure was a nightmare trying to find things in this cabinet. Now, over the 10, 12, 15 years, however long this cabinet's been in use, it served us very well. But we knew it was time to replace it. So we took some time and effort and designed up a new miter saw cart, and we'll show you that now. On the new cart, as you can see, one, it's a little bit more attractive. We went with a 2-tone stain job. We've got solid braces to hold up the supports. That works out much more reliably, and you get better consistency in the height and the levelness of your outboard supports. And there's less chance that they'll collapse on you when you have a long, heavy board on there. We also hinge them so that they could swing up or down. That way, if we get trapped into a place, we can either fold the wing up or fold it down so that we can move it out of the way. We also incorporated lots of storage on this cabinet. We've got plenty of drawers in a high-density storage system that is modular in design. You can make your drawers in any depth that you want and place them anywhere on the cabinet. Furthermore, you can take out your short drawers and move those down to the bottom if you want, or place them anywhere. They're based on a 1 3/4 inch height standard so that you can configure your drawers to any depth. Makes for a very, very flexible system. The slides are nothing more than the drawer bottoms. When we designed those drawers, we tested them up at a 50-pound load rating at 3/4 extension, and they didn't fail. Now, with this type of system, you want small drawers so that you can be more organized. And that's what we chose on this system. By waxing the inside surfaces of the cabinet and the outside surfaces of the drawers function very effortlessly, even with heavy loads, such as our cast iron tenoning jig. We also upgraded to a new compound miter saw. It's still a 12-inch unit, but it runs a little bit quieter, and it has the twin laser lights on it to show us where the cut line is. So that's going to be a nice handy addition to our shop in the way we do our work here. Now, all around the cabinet and the stand and everything else is fairly straightforward and easy to make, but there's a couple of tricks along the way, and we'll show you those. I got started on the project by first taking all my sheet goods over to the panel cutting saw where I cross-cut them to their rough overall length. Then I went over to the table saw where I could trim up each of the pieces and panels to their proper dimensions. As you just saw, I machined a dado on the center of our bottom panel. I'll be doing the same operation on the top panel, but they are different widths, so there will be some fence adjustments to machine that. Now I've installed my 3/4 inch stack dado head cutter and raised it up 1/4 inch. To machine this dado on the bottom panel, I've set my rib fence at 16 inches and 9/16. I pass it over in one direction, spin it around, pass it over the second time, and then check my width and make sure it's 1.5 inches. I'll do the same on the top panel, and then we'll come back to the bottom panel to cut a couple more dados. Now as you'll notice, I moved my fence to the other side of the dado cutter, and that just makes it a little bit easier to cut these next 2 dados. For the next 2 dados, on the bottom panel, we need to come over 1 13/16 inch and machine a 3/4 inch wide dado, and that'll be on both ends of the board. At this time, on the drawer support carrier panels, the 2 outer ones, we want to cut a 3/4 inch wide by 1/4 inch deep dado that will receive the top. And that's 4 inches down from the top edge. So we can go ahead and machine those 2 dados at this time. Now we'll finish up the rest of the dados after a little bit of sub-assembly. Now we're going to start going through, ripping and cross-cutting each of the pieces that will make up the stiles, the rails on the front, the 2 side top pieces, as well as a piece of edge banding for that center drawer carrier panel. So we'll get those ripped up now. Now we're ready to laminate together the 2 3/4 inch thick birch plywood pieces that will make up the center drawer carrier panel. Now I'll be laminating that together with standard yellow woodworking glue. Now we'll very carefully line up the edges, making sure everything's perfectly aligned with these 2 pieces. Then I'm going to drive some 1 1/4 brads in, way out at the extreme corners. And all these brads are going to do is keep these 2 pieces from shifting against one another as we apply some clamping pressure. Now I do want to make sure that these brads aren't in an area where we're going to cut a dado or where we'll be putting any biscuit slots for applying the edge banding. And we'll clamp it right down to the workbench using some cauls to help even out that clamping pressure. And that should do it. What I'm doing now is laying out the locations for the biscuits that will help hold the edge banding against the center drawer support panel. There will be 4 along each face, so we'll have 8 total biscuits holding that edge banding in place. And I'll be using number 20 biscuits for this application. Now it's just a matter of getting some glue in the biscuit slots and assembling the edge banding on. And now we can let that sit in the clamps for about a half hour. I'm getting ready now to do the side panel sub-assemblies, and that'll consist of a couple of components. But most importantly at this stage of the game, we want to take our tops and get those set up so we can fasten them to the drawer carrier panels as well as the outer 1/2 inch thick birch plywood skins. So I've gone through, laid out 4 biscuit locations along the top edge of the drawer carrier panel. and I've got those slots as well in the top. Now I'll do the same process along this edge for the 1/2-inch birch panel. And we'll just put 4 biscuits on the 1/2-inch plywood side as well. Now when you go to cut the biscuit slots in your 1/2-inch birch plywood, make sure you adjust your fence so that the biscuit slot lines up in the center of that 1/2-inch plywood. The side sub-assemblies are going to take a couple of steps to complete. And it'll start out by getting the top attached to the 1/2-inch plywood outer skin, as well as the 3/4 inch drawer support carrier panel. Now we'll get glue in each of the biscuit slots and along the top edges of the plywood. To help with this assembly, I've clamped a board in my end working bench vise. I've already got the biscuits installed in the top piece. Now here's the outer skin, and you're looking at the front edge of it. Now when I rip my plywood, I also took the time to rip some spacer strips, and those will go across the grain in these side panel areas. And they'll just help to support and strengthen up the structure. They just simply get glued in place. I'll position them about 3-4 inches up from the top and bottom, and then one about roughly in the center. Now we'll get some glue on the top edge of our 3/4 inch plywood panel, and we'll drop that in place. After getting the cauls loosely clamped in place, I'll put some more clamps across the long way of the panel to draw the top tight against the plywood side panels. Then I'll go ahead and tighten up the cauls and make sure that everything's good and flat and good and tight. Now, as you just saw, we'll be attaching the stiles to the fronts of our side sub-assemblies using number 20 biscuits. And I've laid out about 5 along each edge of each piece of plywood there. Now, the joint between the front stile and the top is going to be a very simple little molding. And it started out by first ripping a piece 3/4 of an inch wide. Then I set the saw blade over at a 45-degree angle and adjusted the fence over a little bit so that I have flats on the 2 edges and I have a nice wide bevel across the front. Now this little piece of molding will get held in place with glue and perhaps a couple of brads, and the rest of the front face frame pieces will get held in place with glue. Now I'd like to also point out, at this point you should have a left and a right hand side. Now along the back, the top should overhang the back about 1/2 inch. You should have this dado at the top of both pieces. And again, here's that overhang of the top. And that'll give you a left and a right. And we'll get some glue on there for the trim piece. And I don't think I want to see any brads on here, so what I'm going to do is just tape it in place to hold it there until that glue's had a chance to set. By clamping the face frames against each other as we pull these 2 side sub-assemblies together, I'm assured of good even clamping across that whole surface. Now we'll just let this sit in the clamps for about a half hour or so before moving on. After the sub-assemblies had a chance to dry thoroughly, I've gone through, sanded all of the surfaces and joints good and flat. Now what we want to do is machine all the grooves that will serve as our drawer supports. Now that will create a couple of problems, and we've got a pretty unique solution to work around it. Now depending on the fence that you have, the bottom edge may ride up over the top of your fence. So working from the bottom up can be a bit of a problem. Now the other issue is with the height of the center drawer support panel. You'll notice that that's much shorter than the side drawer support panels. So what we've come up with is we've gone through and provided you with a drawing that shows the dimension of all of these drawer runner grooves or dados from the top edge of the finished side subassembly. Now, in order to get our center drawer support panels grooves to all line up appropriately with this offset dimension, what we need to do is rip a board that's 5 1/4 inches wide. And then what we'll do is we'll fasten that to the top edge of that center drawer support panel. Once we get all the machining done, we can remove that panel. Pocket hole screws are a good choice for this application. So we'll go ahead, drill a couple of pocket hole screws on each side, mount it up, and we're ready to start cutting our dados. Now to cut those grooves, I've installed my 1/4 inch stacked dado head cutter, and I've raised it up 3/8 of an inch. To make our first cut, I've set my rip fence at 7 3/4 inches. Now I'll pass this one side over on just the one face that receives the grooves, which will be the face that already has the dado in it. Then I'll run both faces of the center support panel over, and then I'll run the opposite side over. Make an adjustment to the fence, cut all 3 pieces, and repeat that all the way through. Now we can turn our attention to the back panel. What we need to do is notch out that top area. Now you could use a jigsaw, but I'm going to go ahead and use my trim saw. And now we'll just finish up the corners with a handsaw. The little notches on the 2 corners that I just cut at the bandsaw allow for the top to fit in between the 2 risers on the back panel. Now we're ready for a little bit of assembly. I'm going to start out by applying glue in the dados that receive the top. Then what we'll do, we'll get the top installed, and we'll be assembling this case with the front face down against the top of the workbench, with the back side sticking up. And that'll give us access to attach the back after we get everything clamped together. Now what I'm going to do is reach behind and drive some 1 1/4 brads up through that top shelf in that dado area. And those will just help hold it there while we tip it over and start assembling the rest of the case. Right now I'm applying glue inside that dado that will receive our center drawer support panel. With the glue in there, we just slide this panel back, get it up in that dado. Now we'll get glue in the dados for the bottom panel, and then we'll be bringing that in place. Now I also applied glue along the inside edge of our 1/2 inch plywood skins. And that's where it's going to bump up against this bottom panel. A couple of clamps along the top edge of the carcass to draw the sides in against our top shelf. And now I'll get clamps going from the top of the case all the way down to the bottom, holding the bottom tight against the bottom of the case. After placing the back in position, that'll tell me whether my case is square or not. And of course that's dependent upon if your back panel, when you cut it, you made it square. Well, everything looks good and square, so now I can pull the back panel off and then we can attach that in place. Now the back panel will be held in place with glue and brads. I'll apply a film of glue along each of the plywood edges. Now I'll start by tacking the back panel in place here at the top. Next, again, I'll check for square by feeling along the edges of my plywood panel, making sure the case lines up with the back panel. Once I get it lined up nice, I'll just start tacking it in place with some 1 1/4 brads about 6 to 8 inches apart. While the cabinet's still up on the bench, now's a good time to install the casters. And I'm using 3-inch full swivel casters. Now I'll be putting 2 locking casters near the front and then just standard casters near the back. Now to lay out the locations, I've come over 3 1/4 inches and made a mark. 1 inch down from the front, 1 inch up from the back. And then I mark the location of the 4 holes. Then we'll mount the casters using 5/16 machine screws with nuts and washers. So we'll start out by drilling those holes. Our top and bottom rails are going to be held in place with biscuits. As you can see, I've already machined the biscuit slots. The rail will fasten in this fashion. I'm using 4 biscuits along the bottom shelf, 4 biscuits along the top shelf. Now we're also going to be using pocket hole screws to pull in the sides to keep those from wanting to pull apart. So we'll need 1 pocket hole on each end, and those will be on the bottom edge of the rails. So now let's go over and drill that pocket hole. And the Craig pocket hole jig makes it real easy to drill the pocket holes on the ends of our 2 rails. Now before installing this top rail, the last step is to round over the front edge while we can get to the full surface. To do that, I'm using a 3/8 inch roundover bit. Now for some glue in the biscuit slots and along the front edge of the plywood. And finally tighten up the pocket hole screws. I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you truly enjoyed it, please help us share this information with the rest of the communities. Please hit the subscribe button, give us a big thumbs up, and be sure to tell your friends about this channel. Thanks again for watching.